My father used to say that a man who stops feeling the cold has already given up on being warm. I didn't understand that until the winter my son turned 2, and I was standing at his grave instead of his birthday party. His name was Noah. He lived for 19 days. The doctors said it was a heart defect, congenital, the kind that hides until it doesn't. My wife Carolyn and I had painted his room pale blue with white clouds on the ceiling. We never repainted it. We just closed the door. That was 4 years ago. I'm 31 now. I work as a land surveyor for a firm in Kelowna, British Columbia. I drive out to properties in the Okanagan early in the morning when the light is flat and the vineyards are still quiet, and I measure things. Boundaries, distances, elevations. I tell people exactly where one thing ends and another begins. There's a comfort in that kind of precision. You always know where you stand. Carolyn left 8 months after Noah died. Not because she stopped loving me. She said she loved me too much to watch me disappear into the quiet of that house. She moved back to Halifax. We still talk sometimes, politely, the way two people do when they've shared something too large to explain to anyone else. I bought out her half of the mortgage and stayed. People thought that was strange. They said the house would be too painful. But the house was the only place where the silence made sense. Everywhere else, the silence felt wrong. Here, it was just honest. I live on the edge of town, off a gravel road that turns to mud every spring. The property backs onto an orchard that belongs to the family next door. In autumn, the smell of rotting apples comes through the kitchen window in a way that used to bother me, and now I don't notice. I have a dog named Brick, a large, indifferent shepherd mix who sleeps on the kitchen floor and mostly ignores me, which suits us both. That October was the driest we'd had in 3 years, and then overnight it wasn't. The rain started on a Thursday afternoon while I was still out in the field and didn't let up. By the time I got home, my boots were soaked through, and I was thinking only about the pot of lentil soup I'd left in the slow cooker and the fact that I had nowhere to be for 2 full days. I was on the porch pulling off my boots when I saw her standing at the end of my driveway. She was standing very still, the way people stand when they've made a decision and are waiting for the rest of themselves to catch up. She wore a dark green jacket that was doing almost nothing against the rain, no umbrella. Her hair was dark and plastered against her forehead. She was holding a briefcase, which struck me as absurd in that weather, on that road. I recognized her before she said a word. Harriet Uwellet, Crown Prosecutor for the Interior. She'd been on the news twice in the past year for cases that had dragged through the courts long enough to become local landmarks. She had a reputation for being precise, unsparing, and entirely indifferent to how long a trial took, as long as she got the outcome she considered correct. People called her the surveyor, which I'd always found interesting given my line of work. She surveyed arguments, the way I surveyed land. She found where the lines were and held them. She was standing in my driveway in the rain, looking like she wasn't sure the ground was solid. "Can I help you?" I called. She looked up. "You're Daniel Morrow." I didn't like the way she said it. Not a question. A confirmation of something she'd already decided. That's right. She walked toward the porch with the careful steps of someone who didn't usually walk on gravel. When she reached the bottom step, she stopped and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not embarrassment exactly. More like someone arriving at an appointment they'd rescheduled twice and almost canceled a third time. "I need to speak with you," she said. "I know this is unusual. How do you know my name? I looked you up." She said it plainly, like that was self-evident. "You did the survey work on the Lacombe property last spring. Your company's name was on the filed documents. That still doesn't explain what you're doing at the end of my driveway in October." She looked at the briefcase in her hand, then back at me. Something moved behind her eyes. Not weakness. Something older than weakness. "I have a daughter," she said. "She's 7. Her name is Mia. She was diagnosed with a progressive hearing condition 14 months ago. The audiologist in Vancouver says she'll have significant hearing loss by the time she's 10, possibly total by her mid-teens." She paused. "That's not why I'm here." I waited. "I'm here because Mia is asking about her father. I've been telling her he isn't in our lives. That's true. But she's getting older and she understands more than I give her credit for. And I've been watching her try to fill in the shape of something that isn't there." She looked down briefly. "I looked for men who were stable, who had no record of instability or disappearance, who understood what it meant to stay somewhere, even when it was hard." She met my eyes again. "Your name came up." I stood very still. "I'm not asking you to raise her," Harriet said. "I'm not asking for anything romantic or complicated. I'm asking if you would be willing to be someone she could know. A presence. Someone real." She opened the briefcase with steady hands and produced a folder. I'm prepared to formalize any arrangement legally, whatever terms make sense to you. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at her. You put together a file on me. I conducted due diligence. On a person. She didn't flinch. On someone who might be near my daughter? Yes. I felt something move through my chest. Not anger exactly, something colder. I'm not a candidate, I said. I'm not a position you're filling, I understand. No. I don't think you do. I picked up my boots. I have a dead son, Ms. Willett. I have a room in this house I haven't opened in 3 years. I have an ex-wife in Halifax who couldn't stay because the grief was too heavy for 2 people to carry in one house. And you're standing here with a folder telling me I passed your screening process. I opened the front door. You should go. She stood there for a moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back down the driveway into the rain. I watched her get into a dark sedan parked on the road. She sat there for a moment before the lights came on and she drove away. I went inside. I ate the lentil soup. I didn't sleep. 2 weeks later, she came back. She didn't bring the briefcase this time. She was parked on the road again, same dark sedan. When I drove past on my way back from a job in Penticton, I almost kept going. I'm not sure why I didn't. I pulled up alongside her and rolled down the window. She rolled hers down. She looked tired in a way that didn't have anything to do with sleep. You're not here to try again, I said. It wasn't a question. No. Then what? She looked out through the windshield for a moment. Mia asked me last night if I ever get lonely. A pause. I told her no. She said, I think you're lying, Mom. She's 7. Harriet turned back to me. I drove out here because I didn't know where else to go. I know that doesn't make sense. I'm not asking you to make it make sense. I looked at her for a long moment. The light was going flat in the way it does in October when the sun drops behind the ridge. There's soup, I said. If you want to come in, no folder, no arrangement, just soup. She looked at me like she was trying to find the catch. I don't know why you're offering that, she said. My mother used to say there's no problem that gets smaller in a parking lot. I put the truck in park. You can follow me up. She came in and sat at my kitchen table like someone who hadn't sat at a kitchen table in a long time and wasn't sure of the protocol. She looked at the room carefully, not with judgment. With the kind of attention she probably gave courtrooms and case files, cataloging. I noticed she softened slightly when she saw the photo of Noah on the shelf above the window. She didn't comment on it. I reheated the soup. I put bread on the table. I sat across from her, and we ate without saying much, which suited me. Halfway through the bowl, she said, I'm not good at this. At what? Being somewhere without a purpose. I broke off a piece of bread. You have a purpose? You're eating soup. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But it was there. She left before 8. She thanked me at the door with the careful formality of someone who didn't know the right informal word. I told her she didn't have to thank me. She said she knew, but she wanted to. 3 days later, she texted. Not to arrange anything. Just. The soup helped. Thank you. I stared at the message for a while, and then wrote back. There's more if you need it. I didn't expect her to take that as an open invitation, but over the next month she appeared on 2 more Saturdays, each time with a short text, first asking if it was all right. Each time staying for a few hours, each time leaving with the same careful thank you at the door. She started bringing things. Coffee from a place in town, once a bag of apples from the Kelowna market. She didn't make a production of it. She just set them on the counter like she was paying a toll. I started to look forward to Saturdays in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything in a long time, which worried me. I asked about her life in pieces, the way you ask about something you're not sure you're allowed to want to know. She told me she'd grown up in Quebec City, moved to BC for law school, stayed because she found the cases here more interesting. Mia's father had been a lawyer too. They'd been together for 4 years. He'd left when Mia was 10 months old, not dramatically, just incrementally, until one day he wasn't coming back. She'd filed the paperwork herself. Did you ask him to stay? I said. Once. She looked at her coffee cup. He said he wasn't built for it. I respected that more than if he'd stayed and resented us. Do you really believe that? She was quiet for a long time. I've told myself I do for long enough that I'm not sure anymore. I told her about Carolyn. About Noah, not all at once. Over several Saturdays, in pieces. The kind of telling that happens sideways, when you're doing something else, when the silence goes long enough that speaking into it feels natural. She listened without trying to fix anything. She didn't say he was in a better place. She didn't say at least you have time. She just listened, and when I finished she said, I'm sorry that happened to you. 4 words. They were the right 4 words. The December argument came out of nowhere, the way the real ones always do. She'd told me she was looking into private schools in Vancouver, better resources for Mia's hearing support, smaller classes, teachers trained specifically for hearing-impaired students. The school she'd researched was one of the best in the province. She'd have to board, I said. How old is she now? 8 in February. I put down the dish I was drying. You're going to send an 8-year-old to board at a school 4 hours away. It's a day program, Harriet said. We'd relocate, you'd leave Kelowna. For Mia's education, yes. Something came up in me that I hadn't expected. Did you decide this already, or are you telling me because you're actually asking? She looked at me carefully. I'm telling you because it affects you, I said. I know, but it sounds like a decision that's already been made, and you're informing me the way you'd inform a colleague. I set the dish down harder than I meant to. Harriet, that's not how you talk to someone you're. I stopped. She waited. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I wasn't sure what word fit. Someone I'm what? She said quietly. I don't know, I said. But not a colleague. She looked at me for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Brick lifted his head from the floor, looked at both of us, and put it back down. I don't know how to do this without a plan, she said finally. I've been on my own for 7 years. I make decisions. That's what I do. I evaluate and I decide and I move forward. And then I came to this house and you made me soup, and now I don't know how to make a decision without wanting to tell you first, and it scares me. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands were flat on the table. It scares me that I care what you think. I sat down across from her. Why does that scare you? She looked at me directly. Because everything I've cared about has either left on its own or I've had to let it go. Mia's father, my mother last year, a miscarriage the year before Mia was born that I've never told anyone about. She stopped. I'm very good at surviving things. I'm not good at holding them while they're still here. I felt something shift in my chest. The specific ache of recognizing something in someone else that you've spent years trying to name in yourself. I didn't open Noah's room for 3 years, I said. Not once. I told myself I was protecting the memory. But I was protecting myself from having to feel how real it was. I looked at the table. Last spring, I finally opened it. I sat in there for an hour, and then I repainted the ceiling, not to erase him, just because I thought he'd probably have wanted the room to be used. I looked up at her. Holding things doesn't mean holding them still. She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she'd been trying to learn. I don't want to make the Vancouver decision alone, she said. I'm not saying don't go. Mia needs what that school can give her. I'm saying I want you to tell me you asked me first. A long pause. You're right, I should have asked. Yeah, she exhaled slowly. Would you come with us to see it? The school? The school. Mia would like to meet you. She said it carefully, watching me. She's been asking about the person I visit on Saturdays. Something moved through me that I wasn't prepared for, not fear, not the old grief pulling, something new that I didn't have a name for yet. Okay, I said, I'll come. We drove to Vancouver on a Saturday in January. Harriet and Mia picked me up in the early morning. Mia sat in the back seat with a coloring book and headphones adjusted carefully around her new hearing aids. She didn't say anything to me for the first hour of the drive. She just watched me in the mirror every few minutes with the serious eyes of a child who is taking a measurement. Somewhere past hope, she leaned forward and tapped my shoulder. I turned around. She signed something slowly, clearly. Do you know any signs? I looked at Harriet. She was watching the road, but there was something careful in her posture. I turned back to Mia and shook my head slowly. Mia considered this. Then she reached into her bag and produced a small laminated card with basic signs printed on it. She held it up to me with an expression that said, Start here. I spent the rest of the drive learning the signs for hello, thank you, dog, and apple. Mia corrected my form with the patience of someone who has been doing this a long time. By the time we reached the city, she had added good morning and something I think meant you're trying too hard, but she signed it while almost smiling, so I didn't mind. The school was everything Harriet had said it was. Wide hallways, visual cues everywhere, teachers who signed naturally in conversation. Mia walked through the tour with her eyes wide and her head turning constantly, like she was calculating the distance between who she was and who she might be allowed to become. On the way back, she fell asleep in the back seat before we reached Abbotsford. Harriet drove. I looked out the window at the valley, opening up again. She liked it, I said. She did? Are you going to move? Probably. A pause. I wanted to see how you looked when she fell asleep. I turned to her. What? You looked at her like you recognized her. Harriet kept her eyes on the road, but her voice was different. Not the way a stranger looks at a child. The way someone looks at something they've been missing without knowing what it was called. I didn't answer. I looked back out the window. I know about Noah, she said quietly. I mean, I know what you told me. I also know there are parts you haven't told me. I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that Mia isn't a replacement. I would never bring you near her for that reason. I brought you to meet her because I thought the two of you might understand something in each other that I can't give her. I stared at the highway for a long time. She signed to me first, I said finally. She made the first move. She handed me the card. I know. Harriet's voice was careful. She doesn't do that. I didn't say anything else. But something in me that had been closed for a long time opened, just slightly, the way a window opens when the pressure outside changes. In February, I told Harriet I loved her, not in a grand moment. We were standing in the kitchen after dinner, and she was trying to figure out how my coffee maker worked, and failing in the particular focused way, she failed at domestic things, with full commitment and zero technique. I watched her for a moment, and then I said it plainly, the way you say something true that you've been carrying long enough. She turned around and looked at me. I know, she said. I've known for a while. Were you waiting for me to say it first? I was waiting to be sure you were ready. She set down the coffee pot. I love you too. I have since the drive back from Vancouver. Since you watched her sleep, I walked over and stood next to her. That's a very precise moment to identify. I'm a precise person. I know. I took her hand. I don't mind. She moved to Vancouver in March. The distance was real, and neither of us pretended otherwise. 4 hours is 4 hours. We drove it every 2 weeks, alternating directions. She came to Kelowna. I came to Vancouver. Mia learned 17 new signs in her first month at school and taught them to me over FaceTime with the systematic patience of someone who had decided I was a project worth completing. The hard thing came in April. I'd driven down for the weekend. We were sitting on Harriet's small balcony, late, after Mia was in bed, and Harriet told me the Vancouver firm had offered her a position. Senior partner, building their criminal division. Permanent. She'd been in Kelowna for 11 years. The Kelowna position was a contract that renewed every 3 years. The math was straightforward. She said, I'm not asking you to move, I know. But I need to tell you that I would ask if I thought it was fair. I looked at the city lights below. Kelowna was an hour's flight or 4 hours of highway and mountain. My work could go anywhere, technically. Land doesn't care where the surveyor lives. The firm in Kelowna was one of 3 in BC with the contracts I worked on, and 2 of the other 3 were in Vancouver. Would you want me to? I said. She turned to look at me. For the first time, I saw something in her expression that she'd been very careful to keep controlled. Fear. Clean and uncomplicated. Yes, she said, but I'm not going to leverage you with that. Harriet. I said her name the way you say a word when you want someone to stop performing and just be in the room. You don't have to be strategic with me. She looked at her hands. I've been strategic with everyone for so long I'm not entirely sure I remember how not to be. Try. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm afraid you'll come and then realize this is too much. A 7-year-old who needs more than ordinary parenting. A woman who is very bad at being ordinary. A life that has more in it than a quiet house at the end of a gravel road. She looked up. I'm afraid I'll fail you the way I've failed at holding things. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the sky. I have a gravel road and an indifferent dog and a room with new paint on the ceiling, and I've spent 4 years being very comfortable with the idea that I didn't need anything else. I turned to her. I was wrong. I just needed the right complicated thing. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, You could still stay in Kelowna. I know. I paused. I don't want to. The move happened in June. Brick traveled badly and spent the entire drive giving me a look of profound betrayal from the back seat. Mia met us at the apartment with a sign she'd made on construction paper. Welcome, Daniel, and Brick with a drawing of a dog that Harriet told me she'd started 3 days before we arrived. That night after Mia was asleep, Harriet and I sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by boxes because we hadn't found where we'd put the chairs. Brick had claimed the only unpacked blanket. The kitchen light flickered because we hadn't figured out the building yet. This is a mess, Harriet said. Yeah. I looked around. I like it. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm not going to be easy to live with. I know. I plan things compulsively. I make decisions before I've asked you. I have a hard time letting things be imperfect. I know all of that. And you still moved 4 hours and one very unhappy dog to be here. Brick will recover. I put my arm around her. So will we. She was quiet for a moment. Then I spent 7 years being competent at everything and warm at nothing. You made me soup in October, and now I don't know how to be anywhere you're not. She paused. I want that on record, noted. It's extremely inconvenient, I know. I turned and kissed her temple. I've been inconveniently in love with you since January. It evens out. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. From the other room, Mia called out something sleepily. We both went still and listened. Then she settled. Harriet exhaled. She does that, she said softly. Calls out in her sleep. She can't hear herself do it. I listened to the quiet of the unfamiliar apartment, the new sounds of a different city. At night, the dog breathing on the floor, the girl asleep in the other room, who had handed me a laminated card and decided I was worth teaching. We'd each come to this from a loss we hadn't fully named. Harriet from the long work of raising a daughter alone, of building something solid around a wound she never let anyone see. Me from a room with blue walls and a ceiling full of clouds, from a silence I'd gotten so used to. I almost didn't notice when it started to lift. Home isn't always the place you came from. Sometimes it's the place that gets built while you're paying attention to something else. A kitchen table in October, a backseat sign language lesson, a laminated card that said, "Start here." We started here.